it is very much a case of I'm an enthusiast about wildflowers. I became particularly enthusiastic about orchids. Can't really explain why, but they do appeal to a lot of people. And I remember very, very vividly one of the few walks that I've managed to attend, and I wish I could sometimes go on more, but I attended one on May the 25th in 2010. It was a walk led by Julie Clark, and we went on to Gate Barrels. And there we saw some of the early reintroductions of the lady slipper orchid. That was absolutely fabulous. And other things, but as you can imagine, by then I was already somebody that thought all wildflowers are wonderful, but orchids are absolutely fabulous. So the point of my little talk is that really it's to give you some pictures of what I did in 2001, because basically it's like a whirlwind tour of the species that I saw and photographed. Because once I knew that the travel restrictions after COVID were going to be removed, I decided that I would want to see the plants that I'd missed in 2020. And I would also then think about making it as many as possible. But I was feeling cautious and I didn't want to use boats and planes. So although I've called it Mainland, I am very well aware that the mainland is not it includes Northern Ireland, but you've got to go by boat or plane. And also I know that our members are in Éire itself. So I didn't get to see the dense flowered orchid, which grows in Northern Ireland, or the loose flowered orchid, also known as the Jersey orchid, which grows in the Channel Islands. And across the border, I didn't get to see the Irish Marsh orchid, which obviously grows in Southern Ireland. And during lockdown, the Hebridean marsh orchid, which of course is on another island, was reclassified as a variant of Pugsley's marsh orchid. So it was no longer counted as a separate species. So we lost that one as a species. So being quite elated that it would be a better year for orchid hunting, I got a bit ambitious, and that was when I set off to go and see as many as I could, in addition to the ones I hadn't seen yet. However, my plan fell at the first hurdle. The earliest flowering UK species is the early spider orchid, and it's usually at its best somewhere towards the end of April. And we weren't going to be out of lockdown as far as travel restrictions and therefore being able to stay overnight in a hotel was concerned until May the 17th, by which time they could be a little bit long in the tooth and looking bedraggled. So I thought, oh, well, I just can't manage 600 miles round trip in one day to go to the south coast and back, because I live between Blackpool and Preston. And I thought, that's a lot of car miles, but it's also a lot of hard work to do a job like that. And we weren't supposed to be staying in hotels until May the 17th for leisure. So I would have to settle for visiting local sites. Unfortunately, living in the Northwest, then I've got lots of places I can go to that are less than a day's journey. Well, they aren't a full day at all. So I knew that I'd be able to see lots of lovely orchids. So who comes along first? Well, I'll just change the slide. The first orchid that I should see in the year is the early purple orchid. And actually, I've been today to the lots in Silverdale, and they are out. They are still quite small. I think that the cold snap that we had just recently has slowed them down. But I like to go and see the lots in Silverdale, it's known about, for the early purple, which of course aren't all purple, as you can see. They're sometimes pink, they're sometimes white, and colours in between. And they are very widespread. They are in open pastures. And I'll probably make more of a fuss where the habitat is not going to have an underlying calcareous soil, because chalk, limestone, most orchids live there, but not all. And those are the ones that I will mention to you particularly. So you can always think that if you're going to find an orchid, it's probably going to be in a region of our country or our countries that have underlying calcareous soils. The other plant, and this is a plant that is noted for its spotty leaves. It's noted insofar as it will sometimes grow in woodland before we get leaf burst, so that it's still getting the light on the plants. So the other one that grows happily, there are three, but the other one that grows at this time of year, that's towards the end of April, is the green winged orchid. Now then, that, as you can see, had an old name, the green veined. You should be able to see the marks on the sepals there, that are the veins. They're not veins, but the marks on there. And that also comes in lots of lovely colours: pink, white, deep salmon pink, stripy, and of course purple and dark purple. So those are my first two plants, and I say I have actually been and seen some this morning in the very place that I mentioned, the lots on Silverdale. Now then, we go into May. So May arrived, and in 2001 it arrived, and these two beautiful plants continued to flower, but I was looking forward to that May the 17th. And I decided I would head to a part of our country, of England, that will only have flowers that grow basically in the south. They do not grow in the north. So I'd never seen the monkey orchid before. Now the monkey orchid has got a cheeky little face. It's got a cheeky little shape as well, but that grows in Oxfordshire and a couple of other sites. It is quite rare. It's also had, by accident, I'm not sure how it happened, but I believe there was a lady orchid introduced onto the site. And on the left-hand side of the picture is the hybrid. Very, very similar, but you've got a lot more of the little hairs and dots on the lip. So that's been something that's evolved. And the monkey orchid is still there. The lady is less easy to see. I wasn't even sure I'd seen a pure lady, because nearly all the plants that look like that on the left-hand side, I think, will be hybrids. But nevertheless, undaunted, chuffed to pieces that I'd seen something for the first time. I decided that this was now late May, and the rest of my trip would then take me to Buckinghamshire, where the military orchid hangs on by the skin of its teeth, really. It's a flower that's being protected, and that is a reserve that you can go on to. And as you can see from the picture, it's got the cages round it for its own protection. Comes, I think, from the idea that the sepals, when they go together, look a bit like a military helmet. Beside the open field that the military orchids grow in, there is an area where it's a little bit more wooded, and there were the first flowers of the bird's nest orchid. A very, very strange little plant. I love it, but it's quite a strange little plant. It's very widespread, and it has no chlorophyll. So you can see it's saprophytic on woodland species, usually woodlands that are beech, over limestone, over chalky soils. And the left-hand side picture is again from Buckinghamshire, but I've seen them in Gloucestershire and Cumbria, and as I say, really quite widespread. There's an odd site in North Yorkshire as well, which last year I think had 6 flowers in it. That's the most I've ever seen there. So that night, having been to those two sites, oh sorry, before we actually settled in for the night, we moved on to Kent, which was where we were going to settle for the evening. And in Kent, there was a lovely bank of man orchids. Now the man orchid is much more common in the Mediterranean area, but it's rather nice and special. And you're right, it takes a bit of imagination, but you can sort of see a little people. It's a little people orchid. So the man orchid near Gillingham in Kent. It's found in a few other places, in Surrey and Norfolk as well. So we had our overnight stay and a nice breakfast, and got up as early as possible to go onto another site within the area, within the county of Kent, which I'd heard had late spider orchid in it. And there is a late spider orchid. At the same site, there were in fact a few man orchids too. So that was rather a nice treat to see both of them. It is fenced off to prevent trampling, and this is a Schedule 8 wildflower. And I'm sure you'll all know how serious it is to damage or otherwise touch such flowers. And they are protected in law. Another plant that I saw that day, as we moved on to the next well-known site for an orchid I hadn't seen before, I also got an orchid I have seen before. Found in Cumbria, the Chilterns, found in Kent, found in many places. It's the fly orchid, and I'm sure you know the story behind the fly orchid and how it deceives the pollinator, which is a digger wasp, I believe. I had seen one flower open in Cumbria before I moved down to Kent at the end of May for this trip, but that particular flower only had one little floret open. Here we've got a selection of flowers, always on somewhat chalky soil, and as you can see, open fields, sometimes in woodland, sometimes just growing up through the, as you can see, the bricks and mortar, not bricks and mortar, the chalk limestone of one of my favourite reserves near where I live, in just outside Kendal. But what I'd really gone to see, and I'm not ashamed of the fact that as much as I love them all, I had never seen a lady orchid. And it was something that I was looking forward to see. So between going to see these lady orchids, we did actually stop off at another well-known site in Kent, which has a single lady orchid in, but she wasn't open. And I thought, ooh, am I too early? It's one of those things. I know that you're finding that with your own trips. Oh, how are we going to get any flowers when we get there? Well, it's the same with orchids, because we know that there is a flowering period, but just like any other flowers, weather, rain, you name it, it'll change how the flowers open. But as you can see, the lady orchid is an absolutely delightful and quite large orchid. It's another people orchid, and it's got a variety of colours, which I hadn't actually realised. I'm sure I must have seen it in books, but it was when I actually got to this well-known, very famous site at Yocklet's Bank that I saw a variety of colours. And in fact, I ended up staying there for a long time. And there was another site in Kent that I could have gone to see more lady orchids, and the gentleman that was taking photographs told me it was absolutely fabulous, was the other site. But I thought, you know, I'm not going to push it. I've seen them. I've seen some beautiful flowers here today, something to take away and smile about. And I do end up smiling after I've seen orchids. And the other pressing thing, unfortunately, was that overnight, our car had developed a slow puncture. So I tried to find somewhere that would help us get it mended, but no, and nobody could do anything that morning. So I was aware that really I was returning back home that afternoon, whatever, and I shouldn't really hang around and push my luck. I'd seen these absolutely fabulous flowers. I hope you like them too. And some of you, of course, will live down that way and know exactly what I mean. It's thrilling, absolutely thrilling. In the meantime, between sort of late or beginning of April through to all the way through to July, really, we've got the common twayblade. Now, my pictures, you probably won't see an awful lot on them because the middle one has them just coming out, little buds inside the two blades, two leaves. Although I have seen them with 3 leaves, but it is known as the twayblade, and it grows quite happily in open pastures, and it grows also in light woodlands, and it's widespread. So you just could find it in a lot of places, but usually on a chalky soil. The other twayblade, also coming out at the end of May, sometimes in Cumbria as early as the 10th of May, but it is May through to sometimes first and second week of June quite easily, is known as the lesser twayblade. Now that's my finger on the left-hand side touching near the flower, and as you can see, it is small. And the flower underneath it has 3 blades, 3 leaves. So again, as I say, you can get them with 3 leaves, but not very often. It is rare, but I have seen one of the lesser twayblade with 3 leaves. And this is a plant, though, that doesn't grow in calcareous soils. It's growing happily in woodlands that have pine trees, making it slightly acidic, in under heather, which generally needs an acidic soil, and often with moss around. So I love these little angels on sticks. The only thing is, they're absolutely murder to photograph. Very, very difficult to photograph. But that's one of the pleasures. You afterwards say, oh, I've got the flower in focus, but I didn't get the leaves. So apologies, I'm not a brilliant photographer. I just like being able to see them, and I try to take my best pictures. It's also a northern species. I'm afraid you won't find them widespread like the common twayblade. Another beautiful but rare flower is the burnt orchid. that starts flowering where I live in late May and goes through to early June, mid-June perhaps. This is the nominate variety ustulata, because you will find that as it grows, the red on the top, on the sepals, changes and becomes paler and paler, and it has that distinct flowering period of late May and early June. And there is another variety. I don't think there's anything particularly noted in any studies on DNA, but I personally have not been involved in those. I just read things. And the late flowering variety is known as Estivalis, as in summer, and that's mid-June to early July. Now that is quite fascinating insofar as the red colour on the top of the sepals stays red as it grows and gets taller. It doesn't fade as it does with the ustulata. The picture on the left-hand side is me using a mobile phone, just to give you some idea. That's a fairly standard size mobile phone. That's a tiny flower. And I must admit, on the few occasions that I have found them, I do a little dance, making sure I don't trample on anything, but I do a little dance because it's a lovely little flower, it's that, it really is. But it is rare. Again, at the end of May, across the country, in selected places, the stronghold being Hampshire, the sword-leaved helleborine. We do have a spot in Cumbria where they grow. I've looked up some old books, and I love reading through old flora, where people have reported Cephalanthera longifolia. Maybe that's another thing that I'll do another summer, or maybe it's even this summer. I probably will. So this is a plant that is found in Cumbria, Wales. It's found in Argyll and sometimes at woodland edges. It's also known as the narrow-leaved helleborine. You can see why. You can see the leaves are going up at a very sharp angle, like little swords. We're now moving into early June, and in early June you start to see the butterfly orchid. Now, with two butterfly orchids, this one is the greater butterfly orchid. It is larger than its counterpart, the lesser butterfly orchid. It grows again on calcareous soils, usually in light woodlands, and it smells absolutely gorgeous at night, or at least it certainly does to the pollinating moth, which, if you look at the size of that nectary, look at how long it is. It goes down a long way to the proboscis of the moth that was predicted, I think, by Darwin to be able to pollinate this plant. And if you also look at my slightly enlarged picture, look at the pollinia being the packages of pollen that the orchids produce that get taken away by its pollinator. And they are at a sort of an angle, making more like a tent shape, whereas the lesser butterfly, which flowers perhaps just slightly later, but not an awful lot later, grows in more neutral to acidic soils. So they don't often grow together, but in this case, I have seen them on the same site where we've got moss and heather growing over limestone. So that's not an unusual feature, altogether unusual feature, but I don't think I've found a hybrid between the two. And I'm not going to go into detail on hybrids, but I will mention them in passing. I've not included any pictures. One of these days I could even do a hybrid one, or there'd be other people who maybe could do better than me. But this one, the lesser butterfly orchid, if you look at the pollinia on that, just look into the mouth, you will see that they're parallel. And that's, apart from being smaller, expect them in slightly more acidic conditions, and the pollinia will be parallel. And we've also got the heath spotted orchid. Now, I haven't put in the hyphens in the right places yet. I'm still using the words separately. So the heath spotted orchid. Now, that is also a plant that prefers an acidic soil. It is going to be found in damp, acid soils on pastures, bogs, also at quite high altitude as well. This is, yeah, I think both of them are taken at two different sites near Ribblehead in North Yorkshire. So, you know, you've got quite high up there. I love the little shape of them. The lip of them is quite frilly, and the leaves obviously are spotted, but you can contrast that with the next one, which well, sorry, we're not with the next flower, but when we get to it, with the common spotted orchid. Now, the heath spotted orchid is also one that has a colour range. I don't think they've all got different names, or if they have, I'm sorry, I can't give them to you. I just accept they're pink and work their way through to pure white. Pure white is unusual, but I think I might have found one, other than the Polinia look a little bit pink, I think I might have found pretty much an all white one as well on that one. The next, rather scarce and northern only, and Scotland and Ireland as well, is the small white. It's one that is very desirable to see. It is, as it says, small, and it is quite scarce, and that's available to look at in the north and in Scotland anywhere between early June and the 3rd week of June. Obviously, I'm fortunate enough to be able to find them in North Yorkshire. Another orchid that we find in Cumbria, North Yorkshire, and no doubt you will be finding it in the Chilterns, in the South Downs in Scotland. It is quite well widespread, but it's not a common orchid, and it comes in different colours, and I couldn't tell you why they're in different colours, but they are. You've got the pale greens, you've got a good shade of red, you've even got them with green and red in one flower, and they seem to have a flowering period that varies an awful lot. I found them on Ingleborough, on one side of Ingleborough, mid-May to late May, and then on the other side of Ingleborough, you don't find them till the 1st week of July, and that's just one hillside. So whether or not it is any variation in the microclimate, well, it must be, mustn't it? But it's certainly not a variation in altitude, because they're both at height. So I like that one. And again, you've got to look and try and imagine that you've got a frog there. But recently, well, in the last couple of years, 3 years, 4 years, reclassified as a dactylorhiza, which explains, well, helps to explain why it does hybridize with marsh orchids, which are also dactylorhiza, and with common spotted orchid. Northern marsh orchid. Well, by its name, yes, you will find it mainly in the north. In some northern locations, you will find it in Scotland. Sorry, find it in Scotland. Quite a small plant. It tends to grow in damp, somewhat marshy, calcareous grounds, dunes, pastures. It's not usually found in woodland. In fact, I can't think of anywhere I've ever seen it in woodland. And I think the various forms have been given names, whether they've got no spots on the leaves, or they've got spotty leaves, or they've got spotty leaves and blotchy stems. I think they've been given different names. I'll leave you to find that out if you wanted to do so. But there's the Northern Marsh orchid. Its colour is pretty consistent in that shade of purple. Now then, this is a plant that I can't find anywhere near me, the white helleborine. I know that it is a plant of Gloucestershire, and I also know that it really should be seen usually around about the time of the beginning of June. Unfortunately, I nearly missed it, because I didn't get to Gloucestershire until the end of June. So I've showed you a picture, and I'm claiming I saw it. I did see it because a friend of ours took us out and we searched some woodlands and found the white helleborine, one plant with 2 flowers still on it. They don't open any further. The picture on the left-hand side was actually taken in 1985. So that is what the plant will look like when it's fully open at its peak. It looks pretty much like the one on the right-hand side, only just a lot more flowers. It doesn't change. They're always going to be, only with hardly open flowers at all. But staying in Cumbria, we've got the coral root orchid. Now that's an orchid that you will find basically in northern England and Scotland, seen in alder, woods, open woods with alder, obviously damp woods, and birch covering dune slacks. And I'm fortunate enough again to be able to see those in Cumbria, though I believe there is a population in Northumberland, which I haven't been to see. And when I was saying about very difficult to photograph orchids, this is another one. One year when the warden went out, and I haven't put a photograph in, but when the warden went out to actually look for the population and count it, he only had a few children's crayons available to put sticks in the ground beside it. It was quite interesting to see that the plants were marked out with little blue pencils and green pencils and orange pencils, and the colour had nothing to do with it. It was just so we could find them again. It's so difficult to find them and photograph, but well worth the trip, and again only in the north of England. Now this is our iconic Lady Slipper orchid. At the moment, the only place I know of that you can see it is Kilnsey Park Farm, which is north of Grassington in North Yorkshire. It's one of the reintroduction sites. It's in a triple SI, site of special scientific interest, and it is obviously looked after. There is opportunity to see it, but this is a commercial operation that asks for an entry fee, but they're very nice about it. And if you happen to like fishing as well, then you've got everything in one, because they offer fishing as well. But I thought I would show you also a picture from 2018, I think it is, of the Lady Slipper orchid on gate barrows, which I'm sorry to say, that didn't sustain itself. It hasn't reproduced. They were putting in more raised plants to try and make it look good, but it didn't seem to be working very well. And so that site has been cancelled as a site of reintroduction. But they say this one at Kilnsey, I know they look a little bit worn out on that picture there, but I'd have to say they actually look happy. And the others look beautiful, but these ones look really quite happy. And I'm keeping my fingers crossed that maybe we've managed to think like an orchid, because that's the problem. We're being asked to think like an orchid. We're trying to raise them in places where we think they might have been in the past, but not a lot was said. If you look at old flora, they'll mention that it was just near such and such a town or in such and such a wood, but there's no great detail. So we're still learning all the time, and that applies to just about every flower that we want to conserve. So this project is still ongoing as far as I know, but I'm not directly related or involved in it. I just know that everybody likes the Lady Slipper orchid, or I hope they do. I certainly do. Now this is an interesting orchid, the Pugsley's Marsh orchid. That has a lot of things been written about it as to its continental cousins, and I'd have to say that I'm not terribly good at identifying it, and it is quite a specialist identification that you need to be able to work out that you've got Pugsley's Marsh orchids. We've got them in Cumbria. That again is on a triple SI, but there is no free access to it. It would only be with permission, and I can't get hold of that for anybody, I'm sorry. And the other one is also on the Kilnsey Park Farm, and because it's labelled up as being a narrow, the old name for it, which was your narrow, narrow-leaved marsh orchid, that is why I'm quite certain it is, because my photographs are not telling you that. Unfortunately, I don't have photographs that show it from the side. It's quite a tall, straggly plant. The lip is a lot flatter. It's not as round, sort of curved backwards as you would find on the other marsh orchids. But nevertheless, it's got a lot of people who enjoy finding Pugsley's Marsh orchids. And so it has been recognised as its own species. Southern Marsh orchid. Now the Southern Marsh orchid is more familiar to people who live down south by its name. That's an obvious answer to that. But it has crept up as far as Heysham in Lancashire. It's also available, it's also seen across in Yorkshire. Now this is the site of the old works in which the artificial fuel was made for aircraft during the Second World War, and obviously well turned over. So I like going here. It's a bit marshy. But the thing with these plants are that they are more of the dactylorhiza species, and as a result, where they've got chance to hybridize, they will hybridize. And if you look at the middle picture, there's even a common spotted cozying up to a southern marsh orchid. And I'm not entirely certain there isn't a bit of crossing back in the ones on the right hand side of the picture. And I included the other picture because I think it was a lovely day and the swans were on and other birds were on the water. I just thought it looked a very, very pretty setting. So say southern marsh orchid is widespread in the south and not so much in the north, but it is in the north. And the other orchid that I've just mentioned there, the other orchid that I've just mentioned there, the common spotted orchid, very widespread, again on your calcareous soils, ranging from pink through to white, pure white being quite unusual. More often than not, it's pink, or it's that pink with the red markings on the lip. The lip is very distinctive. The lip marking is three-lobed with a very long lip in the middle. And the leaves are spotted, which is where the name comes from. So that is our common spotted orchid, and say one of our most common orchids. And there's a great variation in heights. And you'll find it usually on open grasslands. You won't find it within deep woodlands. Another beautiful orchid that we get towards the end of June, or peaking in June. It's widely seen across England, coasts of West Scotland, West Wales, Ireland. Usually pink, and very, very occasionally an odd white one. I'm sorry I put in rather a tatty looking white one, but it's not very often that I see them. But as you can see, it's a pure white one. The white one was in Gloucestershire, and the sand dunes at Blackpool, not Blackpool sand dunes, but the dunes beyond Blackpool are beautiful with wild orchids in the middle of June. Now this is the orchid that possibly gets most people into thinking about, wow, these grow in the UK. Because when people mention orchids, people think of fancy structures, most beautiful plants indeed, but they don't realise that we also have beautiful ones, as well as the small ones, as well as the small green ones that nobody else recognises. But we do have them. And we've got the bee orchid here, which I'd gone to one particular site in, well, they have them on the dunes at Blackpool, but I'd gone to a site in Clitheroe where it was a variably unreliable plant. But in fact, because of the lockdown, there'd been no attempt to cut the grass on this industrial estate. And would you believe it? Look at all those bee orchids that had popped up there. That was fabulous. But you will find bee orchids in Gloucestershire. You will find them dotted about our isles, and again in Scotland, and in not so much, I don't think, in Scotland. Somebody might want to correct me on that. But you will find them out and about across the country. The early marsh orchid, that is an orchid that is not early. It is actually the latest of the marsh orchids to flower. And this one has 5 different forms insofar as, or 5 different variants insofar as it can be found in 5 distinct colours. The left-hand side is the nominate variety of the flesh-coloured one, the incarnata. The one on the right-hand side is the one I am most familiar with along the west coast of Lancashire and up into Cumbria, which is the coccinea, which is a dark red colour. There is also one that occurs that is purple, that is actually a form of the incarnata. But there's also a purple one that is not a form of incarnata because it grows, and it's the only one of the early marsh orchids that grows actually in a more acidic condition. So that's where we distinguish the one known as pulchella, and I have seen them in Cumbria, but not in 2021. And the one that I haven't been to see, because I say I didn't go travelling by boats and trains, in the west of Ireland there's one referred to as cruenta, which is also a purplish coloured one. But it's a purpley pink one with blotchy leaves and quite a flecked pattern on the flower. And the rarest one is the Ochraluca, which is a creamy white one. And I've not seen that yet. You can't see everything all at once. It's lovely to have something left. But I got to see an awful lot more this year, this 2021 year, to make up for not being able to go out in 2020. Marsh helleborine starts to flower again around about mid-June, sometimes a little bit earlier, usually associated with dunes, usually associated with damp ground and fenlands, but it's also found in quarry bottoms, and there are a few inland sites which seem a little bit unusual, but they do occur. The ones I've pictured show a yellowish coloured flower, which I've seen both in Blackpool and South Wales, and I found on Lindisfarne they seem to be quite a deep browny purple colour. And the far right picture is a picture of one that is much more common as the sort of the typical appearance, with the yellows and the pinks and the purpley colours. And it's a lovely shaped flower. And again, that's another one of my favourites. Then we find that we've got a crop of common or chalk fragrant orchids. Now these are described as being flowers that are on dry chalky grasslands. They're widespread in the Cotswolds, in the Chilterns, in the Downs, Essex, Kent, Western Scotland, Northern Ireland, Western and Central Southern Ireland. So they are widespread, but they do like the chalky environment. And the pink colour is the most common one. The white one is quite rare. And the pink and white one was an unusual one found by a friend in Gloucestershire. So I thought I'd include that. And that was in 2001. And I took the photograph, by the way, but fortunately, having a hobby that allows you outdoors meant that we could at least meet up. And as long as we kept our distance, we could actually speak to each other and share what we were finding. At about the same time, though in some areas it's thought to be a little bit later, the heath fragrant orchid comes into flower. Now that's a lot stubbier, a lot shorter flower, and the shape of the flower is different again. But the fragrance, like the common fragrant, is an absolutely fabulous fragrance. And they describe this one as being a plant where the lip is longer than it is wide. It will grow on heath, i.e. in acidic conditions. It doesn't grow on limestone, well, directly onto limestone, and the sepals are short and pointed at the ends. So that's the heath fragrant, and it does grow near me in Cumbria, but I'm sure it'll also be found elsewhere in the north, but not so much in the south. It is thought to be a northern plant. So it was now late June, and many of the flowers that I'd seen recently were passing, and it was now time to go back towards plants in the south that I just can't find anywhere except by going to the Midlands and the south of England. So I went to Gloucestershire again, where the musk orchid, although it's not its stronghold, has a couple of well-known sites. A very, very small plant. There's even a bud on the right-hand side there. It is a very, very tiny plant. And that one is something I find quite delightful, And took advantage of being a person or being a family that have a motorhome. We went to an exhibition that my husband wanted to attend. And as we did, we managed to detour on the roads through Leicestershire, where I'd heard of a lizard orchid in flower. Now that seems a bit more unusual, though since the original stronghold that most people knew of was a golf course in Kent, this was a chance not to miss out on the Kent ones, but to be able to see them without having to travel quite so far. And we were in the area, it wasn't that difficult to get to. So we went to see the lizard orchid, which is a fascinating orchid. As you can see, it has that very long lip, and I'm told, and I've only seen it 3 times, and each time it's so exciting to see, I've forgotten to sniff it. I don't know what it smells like, but I've been told by people who have smelt it in the past, it's an absolutely awful smelling plant, smelling of a reminiscent of goats. So I don't know if anybody can concur on that, but that's what I'm told. So I've promised myself next time I find a lizard orchid, I'm going to have a gentle sniff of it. I don't think I want a total blackout of goats when I next see one of those. It's a very tall plant as well, although there is a tiny one on the left hand side beside the very tall one as well, but generally speaking it's a tall one, particularly the ones that are on the golf course and in people's gardens in Kent. From the same location in Gloucestershire, where we were staying in our motorhome, we also managed to get to see the red helleborine. Now that is a very rare plant in the United Kingdom. Found its old range was across Buckinghamshire, which still has a site, which is wardened, which is on private land. So I'm afraid I can't say too much about where that is, but I managed to join a group that had a privileged walk there, and it's all caged in, and those aren't just little cages over the flowers. The entire sections are all caged off. I mean, obviously deer are a problem, but they're also making sure that the plant has the chance to grow and not get trampled on, which is always a fear. So that was seeing the red helleborine. Its former range was in the Cotswolds and Hampshire. And in 2021, though I didn't see it, there was one actually found at an old recorded site in Gloucestershire, but it didn't flower in 2022. Still on the same holiday, I was able to then choose to go to South Wales. And from South Wales, I chose to go on to Kenfig, a set of dunes that are well known that have fen orchids. And the warden there has very generously cordoned off an area where the flowers are found so that we have less chance of trampling them if we go to have a look at them. And as you can see, it's on marshy damp ground, because otherwise there wouldn't be a marsh orchid in the background there. So that was a first for me again. So that was another delight that I was able to see that for the first time. Not terribly easy to photograph, but it doesn't quite fall into the category of terrible to photograph. But I still tried, and I hope you like the pictures. And I hope if you haven't seen them, you'll get a chance to see them. I'll just finish there, that the fen orchid, its name fen does imply that it is found in fens as well. It's not just on dunes. And the fens that they've found in still are in the Norfolk area. But again, that's private land. You can't just go walking around on them, I believe, but I haven't been to that area. Now then, the Marsh Fragrant orchid was just coming out on those dunes in Wales. And that is the third known species of the fragrant orchids of the UK. That is quite widespread. It's not uncommon, but you do need the right habitat for it, and it has the same beautiful fragrance, and the lip shape is described as wider than long, with quite broad shoulders. And if you look closely at the pictures that I took, they do seem to have quite a broad shoulder. It often grows quite tall, but as this was towards the beginning of the flowering season, the example that I've photographed there isn't very big at all. But hopefully it was going to grow bigger, and there were a lot more in bud, so that was going to look absolutely splendid. The scent is somewhat clove-like when you read it in books, but I'm not sure about the clove description, but it is absolutely delightful, particularly if you've got a large group of these flowers. You just suddenly go, oh, I know those flowers are there, because it's a beautiful smell that you get. Now this, the dark red helleborine, that is a rare plant, but it is the one that I think really convinced me that I wanted to know more about the family of orchids that we have in the UK. And that plant grows quite close to where I live in Cumbria. And so it's something that I do tend to go and see. But in 2001, I'd spent quite a lot of time in Gloucestershire seeing all those new plants that were around in Leicestershire and South Wales as well. And as a result, I ended up being a little bit late going to see them, but I didn't miss them altogether. You sometimes find them in North Wales as well. That's on Great Orme, and they are well known from a quarry in Durham too. And these, I say, are in Cumbria, outside on a National Trust property that you are allowed to just go across in outside Kendal. I say that really is the one that I think had me absolutely convinced I wanted to know more and see more of the family orchids. Now, the June helleborine, that is one that's just starting to flower as we come into mid-July. The dark red helleborine was at its peak, sort of the first week of July. Say I nearly missed it, but I moved back up to the north and the northwest for a little bit more orchid hunting, and set up a rather interesting little trip whereby I got to see the June helleborine both in Cumbria, near where I live, and that's the right hand side picture, which is the very, very typical appearance of the plant. But there are two that have been more or less downgraded from being species, but one, the Northumberland one, is known as the Tynensis, a variant, because it is found along the River Tyne, slightly different in colour, and that's how it's recognised. A couple of places that I've been to, 2 or 3 places I've been to, and Lindisfarne, now that's an endemic, and again slightly different, very, 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 very pale, and has been christened the subspecies Sancta. And that is part of a trip that I did where I went right the way across to Lindisfarne to see the Sancta subspecies, came back via the River Tyne so that I could see the Tynensis variant, and also take in the other plant, another plant that's flowering at that time of year. This is about mid-July, mid to late July, sometimes a little bit earlier, and it is very much a plant of the north, whereas it is found quite often in Scotland, underneath pine trees. It is found quite often in Cumbria and Northumberland, but again limited to under pine trees. And as a very unusual circumstance is that the only southern site is Norfolk, where it's in pine woods again. So I think we've got a theme going there. So I say that's a lovely, lovely flower to find, but again, very small. I haven't put a finger in the way, but that is quite small. The ladies' tresses are interesting because they actually have the rosettes grow for next year alongside. And I was shown how to look for those as well. You don't have a rosette, you don't have leaves at the bottom of the flower, you have the leaves beside the flower for next year's flower. So now this was a brand new discovery in Wales of the Irish ladies' tresses. And as its name suggests, it was thought to be a species that inhabited Ireland. Well, it does. And I hadn't been able to get to Ireland across besides several lochs in Southern Ireland it's found. I knew it was also found on Colonsay, but again, that would take a boat. So when it was announced that it was going to be possible, the warden again would look after the site and let people go and visit the Irish ladies' tresses. I managed to get a place to go and see them just for the half hour we were allowed. And that was absolutely delightful. Again, asking us to stay outside the tape so that we didn't trample any of the ones that were still underground. So I say, do believe that we need to be discreet about how we do things so that we don't damage other plants, either other orchids or other wildflowers. And I've also been to, oh, sorry, I missed one off. I was going to tell you about the fact that creeping ladies, I've been to Abernethy Forest to see those. That's another place to find them. So there's your Irish ladies' tresses and another helleborine. See, we're now into late July, and helleborines tend to be the flowers of, not the flowers of choice, but the most likely flowers at the end of July. And they're often found in quarry bottoms. They're looked on as being an actual pest in America. They're a weed. And we'll often find them turn up in car parks. Widespread, usually on calcareous soils, quarry bottoms, and also they're quite distinctive in that they have got very wide leaves, broad-leaved. That's where it comes from. I did a quick dash back down to Gloucestershire just to see the violet helleborine, which I'd seen on the 25th of July 2017. The pictures on the right-hand side and at the bottom are of the normal coloured one and the one that doesn't have any green in it. It's a var rosea. Now then, I went back on the same date in 2021 and I looked and all I got was closed spikes until I found one, and even that wasn't fully open. But the picture at the top was the one that I found that had actually opened, but it wasn't as fully open as the ones were on exactly the same day in 2017. By the way, it's called violet helleborine, not for the colour of the flower, but for the colour of the stem. And I think you can see that. This grows in woods, often in quite deep woods, but sometimes at the edge of woods. Now, this is the deep wood helleborine. This one is known as the narrow-leaved, and that's another plant that I find in Gloucestershire. I think I might have written other places down for where to find it, but it's say there's not as many as you might find. And then, sorry, I'm moving the next one on. The third one that I consider very difficult to photograph is the bog orchid. And as the name suggests, it likes to flower where you have a marshy, boggy type of environment, usually where there are runnels of slow-moving water just beneath the blanket bog surface. So the New Forest is another place to find them, but the Lake District is somewhere that we do find them. And I have seen them in several places there and been very careful. I feel terrible going to see them because I am aware that there are a lot of other rare species that are on the bog surface. So I'm very careful what I do. I put a plant stick in the way there because those little green bits at the bottom are in fact more bog orchids, and that's a standard old-fashioned plant stick. The green flowered helleborine is found in Cumbria and Ainsdale, among other places. It's also found in in Gloucestershire, Hampshire, and it's a flower that the flower never really opens very far. But and it looks, until it's open, it's quite difficult to tell whether you're looking at a green flowered, and particularly in Cumbria where the two grow together, it's not always easy to tell whether or not you're looking at a green flowered or you're looking at a June helleborine. But once they're open, the green flowered will always have a green inside of the cup, the hypocyle, and the pedicel, that's where the ovary attaches onto the main stem, will always be green. In a June helleborine, the colour can be anywhere between greens and browns and reds, and the pedicel is always washed pinky purple. And that's one of the main ways of telling the difference, apart from having somebody told you in the past where to find them. And here we are at the end of the year. I'm back where I started. I'm back in Silverdale. I'm back at the lots in Silverdale, looking at the autumn ladies tresses, which I do tend to find both in northwest Lancashire in Silverdale and also in Cumbria, West Yorkshire, and for a lot of you, you'll also be aware that they're found in southern England on Greenham Common, in Essex, on the Downs, on Noah Hill in Hampshire. So it is very much a habitat, a niche habitat, but across the country. This is one that's no longer considered to be actually alive in the UK. It had been planted in gardens. I've got a picture there of a specimen that was dated August 1916, but I've also got a picture of somebody having grown them. So apparently they're not that difficult, but I think they are at the edge of their range. They do not grow very well as far north as as I live. It was when it was found in the UK, it was found in the New Forest area. And a ghost orchid. Well, I haven't seen one It was definitely last recorded from Buckinghamshire in 1987, but I think there's also a 2009 one. The Museum of Wales has an absolutely gorgeous article on it if you want to follow up and read some more. I should actually have amended that slide, my apologies. It's always been rare since it was first found in 1854, and it continues to be rare, but there are still people who go out there and have a look. So I hope to see all of the UK native species that didn't require a boat or a plane to travel there. And did I get to see them all without needing a boat or plane? Well, I think so. The ghost orchid, of course, accepted, but only if you will let me have a year that is April 2021 to April 2022, because by April 2022, we could travel anywhere, stay anywhere. And I went down to Purbeck, to Dorset, to the Dancing Ledge, where they are now in flower, and also across the Isle of Wight, where I found one that hadn't been recorded by the BSBI recorder before, and it was one of 4. So I found 25% of the population of the Isle of Wight's early spider orchids, which I thought was rather a nice idea, one flower, but I think it's under-recorded. If you look at the map, the winds blow in such a way, there should be some more, and the soils are so similar. So I want to say thank you for watching. My references include a variety of books. I'm happy to talk about the books or to put that out, or ask Janet to put that out, and various places that you can find information on the website. And as I say, all the photographs were taken either by myself or my husband Andrew. He has the telephoto lens, which was very useful when we were doing the trip to see the red helleborine. So thank you all for listening, and I hope you've got some inspiration, because if you're thinking, oh, I could just do with 1 or 2 other species and I can help, I will help if I can. But obviously you will find that your branch will probably be able to help you if you live in an area where you're likely to find orchids. So thank you, Janet. Thank you for inviting me.